Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast, a weekly deep dive into the stories that transformed our guests into leaders worth following. I'm your host, Joe Boyd. If you've been enjoying the podcast, thank you so much for being a listener. One simple thing you can do to help us out is leave a review wherever you listen. Today's guest is Dan DeGolier. He is the fractional CFO and founder of Ascent CFO Solutions. We talk a lot about how leadership has changed after the pandemic and how we all need to be able to lead folks anywhere we are. And we'll talk a little bit about that with Dan. Hi, Dan. Welcome to the LeaderCast podcast. Super excited to have you today. Welcome.
Thanks, Joe. A pleasure to be here.
You're in beautiful Colorado.
I am. I'm in Boulder, Colorado today. It's a beautiful day.
Super excited to get to know you a little bit. This is our first time meeting. Dan, you are the founder and CEO of Ascent CFO Solutions and fractional CFO there. I assume you provide that for other people too, correct?
Yeah, we are a fractional CFO firm. So we're 37 people, some CFOs, controllers, senior accountants, and others.
I'll start with this question. When you tell people at a party you're a CFO, do you get a common reaction from folks?
There's occasionally the expectation of a green eye shade, sort of, CPA in the back corner.
Right.
But I think more and more people recognize that they tend to be strategic team members to executive teams.
The best leadership teams I've ever had have had a great CFO who could also understand what it's like to be in a startup, an entrepreneurial place,
For sure. That makes sense.
When you think about, obviously LeaderCast, we're here to fill the world with leaders worth following. That's our mission. And when you think about your earlier experiences, either as a leader or being led by someone, were there early teams you were on? Were you into sports or anything like that? Who were some of the early leaders in your life that maybe shaped you a little bit?
When I was looking into your show and what you do around the hero's journey and things like that, it was in my early adulthood when I started getting into Bill Moyer, to Joseph Campbell, and listened to him being interviewed by Bill Moyers and the power of myth and all that, and sort of seeing what that was all about. That whole concept of the hero's journey was really fascinating to me in those early years, early adulthood, I guess I would say. I definitely in my relatively early career before I started this firm, I did work for a teammate for a leader who was definitely shaped a lot of my confidence and my willingness to start my own thing, and he definitely supported my journey. His name is Kurt Roscoe. He's definitely a mentor of mine. Recently hired him to help my business development team with some growth strategies and things like that. So it's really been neat seeing that go full circle.
That is nice. It's always nice when you've been around long enough that you can bring your mentors in to help other folks. It's a good feeling.
Oh, it's the best. Yeah. It's awesome. Yeah.
Did you have early aspirations around using that story stuff somehow, career-wise? I
don't know if it was as much as it was just the idea of entrepreneurship and being very interested. I graduated with an accounting degree, worked at a CPA firm, did audit and tax, long enough to learn some good skills, but long enough to realize it wasn't what I wanted to spend my career doing. So I was definitely very focused on supporting entrepreneur teams, being part of entrepreneurial teams, companies that are disrupting. Really had a fascination with technology companies and what they were doing. Made my first ever stock investment was Amazon.com in the 90s. Wish I had kept all the shares the whole time, but so I definitely was intrigued by entrepreneurship, and I feel like I've got the best of all worlds now that we get to support over 90 companies in the finance and accounting function, helping them not just with the numbers, but the strategy and the growth strategies and everything from pricing and competition and pricing and compensation and all the things that are that have a financial aspect to them, but are very strategic in nature as far as helping a company become successful.
Yeah, I do want to talk about that because I think living a lot of my life in a sort of startup world, there's this idea that you launch your company, you go for it as hard as you can, you grow it, and eventually you'll be able to get a CFO. And oftentimes in the traditional way, by the time you have enough success, cash flow, all that stuff to afford a good one, it's well past the time you needed one often.
Yeah.
So
Well said.
that of all the positions, that's the one that to me makes the most sense, I guess, to think of it fractionally before you get to a place where you need a full-time one. Or, so I'm just curious about the origin of your company. Were you just seeing that a lot? Were you already working as a fractional CFO? What made you sort of want to do this?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. Thanks for asking that. I would say, so I had taken a role. Was working with Kurt Roscoe, who I mentioned earlier, the person I consider my mentor. That was a larger software company. It was a publicly traded Australian software company. And I had left that role. The commute was very far by Denver standards. It was about a 2.5 hour commute per day. Yeah. And it was becoming kind of grueling. I had a young family at the time. So I took a role at an early stage software company raising its first round of capital, and right away realized they needed what I was good at, right? They needed help improving their financial reporting, their KPI and metrics tracking, their forecasting, their fundraising. They're raising that first round of VC, and but it wasn't like necessarily still a full-time job. The company was under $10 million in revenue, and that was my moment, my sort of light bulb moment, saying they can't afford me, but I could. What if I was the CFO for 3 different companies or 4 different companies? Right. Wouldn't that be interesting? And so that was the sort of the origin story of the firm. I started as a single fractional CFO and was working with 3, 4, or 5 venture-backed technology companies. And then it kind of just took off from there. I was, had developed a good reputation. People were still bringing me opportunities when I had a full plate of work to do. So I started adding teammates, and it just was a very organic sort of growth story.
Roughly what year was that when you first started doing that kind of work?
So I started the firm in 2011, and then in 2015 is when I rebranded it from DeGolier Consulting to Ascent CFO Solutions and brought on a second CFO.
Were there many? I guess I've only been sort of familiar with kind of fractional C-level language for maybe 5 or 6 years. Were there many other folks doing that back then, or like, was I just not aware of it, or was it kind of a new thing altogether?
It was pretty new. There'd been maybe 1 or 2 firms, usually focused on larger size companies that were doing more consulting projects. Yeah. But the term fractional, I would say as little as 7 or 8 years ago, if I was meeting somebody and told them I was a fractional CFO, I would get a deer in the headlights look, and I had to explain it. But the last several years, definitely people know what it is, whether it's finance or marketing or revenue officer, CMO, CRO, CTO, CFO, all of those. There's a lot of HR, chief of staff. There's a lot of functions where I think there's a greater awareness about the fractional model. But finance in particular, I think lends itself to the fact that as a growing company who's in that startup phase, but they're starting to really scale, they can get a really quality CFO on their team for a couple of days a week, and not have to pay a full-time salary, and they can fill in the rest of the accounting department with full-time people as they scale.
I've always generally just defaulted to building teams, especially like staff teams in an office where people are physically there, and we can have lunch together. And I could see it being kind of an old school way to kind of think, I don't want someone who just wants to be here part of the time. Like, we're on a task to change the world here. I don't want my CFO 1 day a week. Even though I could see the great value of that, I wonder, just because it's a leadership podcast, like, are there leadership issues or maybe preconceptions that you deal with when folks think about someone in such an important position being basically part-time,
Yeah. Yeah. There is a point, there is an inflection point for companies where full-time does make more sense. Yeah. But, our sort of philosophy and the approach we take with all of our clients is to be very, very deeply engaged with each client as part of their team. So a CFO might have 3 or 4 clients, and they, some might be a couple days a week, others might be a day a week, others might be just a couple days per month, as they kind of spread out the time, based upon their needs. But for us, our best engagements is definitely where we're engaging very deeply. We're part of that team. We're still talking to the CEO maybe every day, or the exec team. We're very much integrated as part of that team. We're just, especially in this more virtual world where more companies tend to be virtual and aren't in the office all the time. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, we still go to the office. We do spend time at our clients' locations, especially early on in engagements. But I think that it's definitely an adjustment if somebody's used to, if the leadership team is used to always being in person, having full time, that there might be an adjustment to recognize, okay, the CFO is going to be, full time Mondays and Wednesdays, but on the other days of the week, they're still reachable. They can still hop on a Zoom call. They can hop on a Slack message. They can hop on, a phone call or a text message. So there's still very active communication, very much of an integration with the clients. But again, the assumption is that you're as you're scaling, you can't afford and don't need somebody 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week.
Yeah. I as you were talking, I had a phone call with a client like 2 hours ago, and this is hot off the press. It's nothing big, but he just said something that I've heard so many times. He's like, I want to do this, kind of a sales call, I guess. He's like, I want to do this. I'm all in. As the CEO of the company, he's like, but I got to run it by my CFO, and she's going to ask me a ton of questions, and and there's that's their job, right? So I'm curious, just as take the fractional part out of it for now, but leaders that are leading a team and then have their financial partner, maybe not even a CFO yet, could just be a controller or something. How do you think those relationships work best? Because there's obviously natural tension sometimes, right? And I'm just curious if any leadership lessons or thoughts you might have there about how does kind of the point leader interact with their financial person in the best way?
Yeah, no, I think there are CEOs who just want a yes person. People are going to surround the people who are just going to agree with what they say. But I think the best leaders want to have people who are going to possibly propose a contrarian view, and especially when it comes to managing cash flow and if you're a company that's growing and burning cash and having to raise outside capital, you want the discipline of a CFO who's gonna maybe challenge certain expenditures and say, well, let's what is the ROI going to look like on this given expenditure? Let's have a dialogue about whether this is the best use of cash, and of course that changes based upon the sector the company is in, where they're at in their trajectory, and also the current fundraising and economic environment. Right now we're raising capital is more difficult than it was a year ago.
Sure.
And so there needs to be a certain amount of discipline about how do we still shoot for growth and success and market capture while still making sure that we have the runway we need to survive and outlast the competition.
Totally agree. There's always phases to growth, and there is a phase probably where that needs tempered a bit at times for folks.
Yeah, I mean, I was working for a software company during the .com bust, right? And so, we saw a similar cycle a few years ago where venture capital was flowing so freely, and companies felt like they had an unlimited spigot of cash available to them. And then just like we saw in sort of 2001 with the .com bust, suddenly, now never mind, you no longer can easily raise capital. Right. Your investors are maybe not going to just write you another. You're not going to have new investors and existing investors who are just going to write you checks without much diligence. So, I think there's lessons will be repeated until learned.
Sure.
So I think there's definitely a macroeconomic environment that I think affects those things, and also just a certain amount of discipline I think is healthy throughout the company's lifestyle, even when money appears to be growing on trees.
Yeah. I'm curious about your own business as it's grown. We use the Joseph Campbell language of it. There's a dragon that usually stands in our way to get where we want to go. Did you have, as you were building this company, were there moments that you could actually label, that was the dragon or the monster I had to slay to get where we are today, and that was the big problem in front of me. I'm just curious if you had some of those moments and how you address those issues.
Yeah, I think my biggest dragon was just confidence, like that I could, that as a person with a CPA background, and as kind of you implied earlier, CPAs don't tend to be the most extroverted people in the world. Just kind of getting out there and saying, yeah, I'm building a reputation. We're building something great. And then, having that confidence to say, yeah, let's not give up. Let's keep doing this. Let's keep going to events and meeting people and telling the story and being able to, sign new clients and hire more people. I mean, it's one thing to hire to bring on new logos and new clients, but it's also critical to tell the story to candidates. We're hiring really, really high caliber CFOs who have a lot of options available to them. And so it's critical that we, create a great culture and create a place where people feel safe and there's a lot of integrity and they can be proud to be part of our team. So that's been, it takes a lot of work. You can't take your eye off the ball when it comes to, sort of realizing that culture, especially when in a virtual world, right? Where it would be natural for us to be very siloed. So we make a very strong effort to have a lot of team events. We get together 6 or 7 times a year in person. We get together every month on Zoom for an all hands call and go through, client challenges. We go through, opportunities. We go through educational, events and provide, keep everybody up to speed on accounting pronouncements and strategies around, reporting, things like that. So very much of a focused team building sort of environment where it would be very easy to let that lapse and let that fall to the wayside.
My assumption is that a lot of you are pretty similar because you went into the same field, so that kind of makes your team makeup a little different than other teams, perhaps. Any challenges as a leader with sort of having folks that maybe all think kind of similarly about things?
I think we have a lot of diversity in the way that in people's backgrounds and the industries they're in and the way they approach. I mean, CFOs usually come up either the CPA accounting route or they come up more of a private equity investment banker or Wall Street kind of route. And so I think that we do have a good variation of skills, backgrounds, opinions. And so we as I mentioned earlier, we've got not just CFOs, but we have, that's the whole stack of accounting resources and senior accounting managers, financial analysts. And so, we've got mentoring, we've got collaboration, we've got different points of view and different backgrounds as we go up the stack. We're leaning really heavily now into data visualization, and we have a solution called Insights, which allows us to build really cool, newer technology, visualization things for our clients. And so, maybe some CFOs are a little bit less used to that and more used to doing everything in Excel, and other CFOs are really hungry for new technology and more efficiencies and things like that.
Well, Dan, it's been super great to talk to you, man. This has been both educational and interesting to get to know you a little bit. If what you're saying if obviously some folks out there might be like, I need one of those. What's the best way for folks to reach out to you or your company?
Yeah, our website's ascentcfo.com. There's a contact us page on there. They can use that. Connect with me on LinkedIn is another way. I'm easy to find there. We don't do a lot of social media necessarily, but LinkedIn is where we do any content we're producing and things we want to share tend to be on our LinkedIn page. So I encourage people to follow Ascent there and reach out to me.
Thanks, Dan. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. My final question is this. If we find ourselves in Boulder, Colorado on a Friday night with nothing to do, what's the restaurant or bar we should go to that only the locals know about?
Yeah. Am I allowed to say it though?
Yeah. I mean, ocean.
Yeah, there's a newer restaurant called Stella, which is on Walnut Street. It's sort of like a speakeasy. There's no signage. There's just an S on the door. and it's a very good restaurant. But I would first make sure you get there while it's light and get a hike in or a snowshoe or something like that. So
sure.
So you appreciate that meal afterwards.
It's a very Midwestern question to ask about food before the hiking, right? Well, I'm sure the whole thing about new speakeasies is they don't want anybody to know about them, but they want everybody to know about them. So I'm sure Stella will appreciate the plug. Thanks, man. Maybe we'll have a cocktail at Stella someday when I get out there. It was a pleasure to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you too, Joe. Thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'd love to. Hopefully, we can meet in person when you visit Boulder.
That'd be awesome. I'll talk to you later.
All right, take care. Cheers.